Hello, Mallards. It is Thursday, and this evening I watched The Suicide Squad with Meg and Amanda because DC has reached the point where it's like Fast and Furious and it just arbitrarily adds a "the" to differentiate its movies. So do not confuse the movie I just watched with 2016's Academy Award winning Suicide Squad. This is The Suicide Squad, completely different film. Although with a alarmingly similar premise. Mostly because, it's still about Amanda Waller putting together a group of criminals and sending them out to do stuff that other people wouldn't do with tiny bombs in their heads that she will activate and explode if they don't do what they're supposed to. But also there's a black man who is good with weapons, who has a child that seems to be the only thing he actually cares about, and that is used against him in order to force him to be part of this team. Not that that is a huge part of what happens with Bloodshot, which is Idris Elba's character, necessarily, but it just did strike me that those premises were very similar, and I found that interesting. But overall, this film is completely different from the other Suicide Squad film. First, although it's absolutely ridiculous, it leans hard into that and still has a better following plot. Like, it builds in a way that is off kilter but makes sense as it goes along. And I think that DC has done something very smart with this film, and it is something that they should continue doing, and I really hope they do, where they said, forget it. We're just going to be weird and funny, and we're going to completely embrace that. We're going to introduce you to a bunch of characters in the very first few minutes, and then we're going to murder them all. It worked really well for Deadpool. I think it'll work for us, and it does. I think that they're going to be much better off sort of embracing the ridiculousness rather than trying to be the kind of high action, rigid seriousness that Marvel has sort of become known for. Not that Marvel's terribly serious. As you know, I thought that Black Widow was hilarious, but there's a sort of gravity to what happens in the MCU films. They have built this interconnected world and really sort of driven their characters in such a way that there's a lot of weight to a lot of the things that happen. And I feel like in the Suicide Squad, there was weight to really not... They killed a lot of people. Like, a lot. The tagline is "Don't get attached." And that's totally fair because they really do kill a lot of people. So, like... Don't get attached. Spoiler alert, the person is probably gonna die. And so it's not that there aren't consequences, and it's not that there aren't serious moments or bad stuff happening, but they've made the decision to just not take themselves seriously. And this is one of the things that I really loved about Birds of Prey. I thought that they embraced the kind of wackiness, and that's partially because it was led and narrated by Harley Quinn, and so they could be inside of her mind and sort of let that drive the wackiness, and I can see some of that bleeding over into this film, and I think it works really, really well. That film was 2 hours and some change, and I was delighted for most, if not all of it, and I haven't been able to say that about a classic DCU movie, and Birds of Prey is probably the only thing that I really, really have enjoyed coming out of the DC film franchise. And that's really unfortunate because they do have a lot of interesting plots and interesting characters. I mean, I watch a TikTok account called Panda Red that's just this guy making jokes about the Bat family. And I watch that religiously when I know literally nothing about Batman. But I do find his content really entertaining. And it's because he leans hard into the absurd parts of the way DC works. And I think that that is something that sets DC apart from Marvel in a very different way, and something that the films should really try to embrace. I think the success of The Dark Knight was a detriment to DC films in general, and perhaps also the success of the MCU, because then people are like, oh yeah, this is what superhero films are. They're like very serious and everything is really important and it's life-shattering and there's a giant, beam from the sky is required for all action movies and all of the stuff that's sort of evolved from that. And that is unfortunate, because what has sort of made DC interesting is that a lot of it is really wacky. And there are wacky Marvel characters, the West Coast Avengers, the Great Lakes Avengers, like a lot of the people that are in Deadpool's playground are kind of wacky, but that's not usually the core. And even the X-Men, who have some wacky characters, like a lot of their storyline in the comics is very driven with like a different sort of heart and a little bit more of a serious nature. And also a big thing in Marvel is the way that they build their heroes with sort of lights and darks and flaws. There's a lot of internal conflict in a lot of the Marvel stuff. And DC has some of that, but they also have learned to rely on a lot of external conflict, which is not necessarily a bad thing. That's not something I'm knocking, but they have a lot of conflict between characters rather than conflict within characters. And depending on what you're going for, that works. And the other thing that they have is funny stuff. I mean, a huge amount of DC stuff is hilarious and completely off kilter and completely wacky and just embracing the absolute ridiculousness of it all. And I think that DC films could really go for that. I think that their television shows do more of that, for sure. Like Arrow is a little bit serious, but then they steered sort of away from that. Flash is pretty wacky, like walks the middle line. Supergirl gets really wacky. Legends of Tomorrow is like nothing but yucks with its serious moments, but like really leaning into that. Doom Patrol, absolutely insane. Also probably one of the best things that DC has created. It's so good. Stargirl, I really enjoyed. I understand why it didn't do well, but also leans into that wackiness. Like your parents being supervillains, the idea that your supervillain parents are going to beat up the coach because he won't put you on the team, like how dumb, but also entertaining. And it is okay to not be super serious and heavy about everything. I think that the Suicide Squad is a breath of fresh air. It is very different. It was fun from start to finish, and just the way that everything leans hard into the we are very strange. Like we are gonna just put a humanoid weasel into this film and King Shark and the Polka Dot Man. Like we're gonna pick out the weird characters and we are gonna go hard to make you care about all of them. We're gonna have a character whose whole thing is that he just thinks everyone looks like his mom. And so randomly throughout the film, this woman is gonna be wearing everybody's costumes, or like her face is gonna replace everybody's faces, or she's gonna become a giant kaiju. And that is completely insane and yet works. It really, really works. The point of this is that I think you should go see the Suicide Squad. I think that we should stop taking films so seriously sometimes. Sometimes it's to their detriment. Sometimes people take things so seriously that everybody's so worried, so they wait a ridiculous amount of years to release a Black Widow film because they feel like, wow, they can't do it justice. And what if nobody comes to see it? Because, you know, who comes to see a film with a woman as the lead, as a superhero? Because superhero films are serious and they always have men. No, let's be wacky, and then it will not take that long at all. And I think that there is space for this wackiness. It does have a lot of things that remind me of Deadpool. I love the Deadpool films, obviously. And not just because of Ryan Reynolds, but like also mostly because of Ryan Reynolds. And I think the embracing of that wackier side worked really well for Deadpool. And I think that DC could play into that. Flash can be an absolutely wacky character. Aquaman, like, they were like, no, we're going to make Aquaman serious. We're going to put Jason Momoa into the role, and we're going to make people be like, nah, Aquaman's not a joke. Why not, guys? Aquaman is a hilarious joke. The superhero whose only power is he talks to fish is not true. I understand, like, Aquaman has a lot more going for him than that. I get it. But why not just lean into what people believe? I see no reason to not embrace the joke and just go for it and become the films that people go to escape, because they just spent 20 minutes crying and in anguish over Endgame, and they would like to instead just watch some absolutely absurd amounts of violence and characters that make no sense who just accept all of their wackiness in stride. And that's the other fun thing too, is this entire film, every time something weird happens, the characters are just like, yeah, this is just the way it is. Like, Nathan Fillion's character's arms come off and they float away to beat up guys, and everyone's like, yep, okay. Or they're like, what in the world is happening? And that's okay too, because they are acknowledging the absurdity that's occurring. And I think that that also is fun and puts the audience in on the joke sometimes, which is really nice. I highly recommend this film. You should absolutely check it out. Hopefully you sat through all of my ramblings to get to the part where I say, please watch The Suicide Squad. In fact, everybody watch The Suicide Squad. Purchase The Suicide Squad. Support The Suicide Squad. I would really love it if DC stopped making The Dark Knight over and over and over and over, and never made Batman vs. Superman ever again, and instead just made absolutely absurd things like this. Because this is content I would enjoy. This is a universe that I could have a lot of fun in, and I would continue to watch. And I'll see you tomorrow.